Buenos días reiterados.
Good morning again.
Inicio
We are starting
la sesión de la mañana
the morning session of the VIII
sobre el cambio climático
Congress on Climate Change in the framework of the 14th International Convention on Environment and Development that, as you know, is taking place in Cuba from the 3rd to the 7th of July. This morning, we will have a panel
vinculado a los impactos relacionados con el
on
tiempo, el clima,
impacts of time,
Latina y el Caribe,
the sea and water in Latin America, and the multi-threat early warning systems to improve anticipated actions or preemptive actions. In the morning, we will be having the launching of the presentation of the report on climate in situation in Latin America and the Caribbean for 2022, and then the higher level panel on the topics we have mentioned. This event is part of our International Congress, and also we will start in the afternoon the regional meeting of the conference of the director of weather forecasting facilities Latin America and the Caribbean in relation with the regional organization 3 and 4 of the World Meteorology Organization. And then we will also see the climate situation for 2022. The representatives of weather forecasting representatives from countries and other climate service users will be discussing matters on early warning systems in the region and the alert for everyone that has been launched by the General Secretary of the United Nations. The early warning systems are climate change adaptation measure with a shown and feasible effectiveness that save lives and provide profitability that multiply by 10 the version analyzed or investments carried out before. Also, the sixth evaluation report of the Intergovernmental Experts Meeting on Climate Change (IPCC) on the impacts and vulnerabilities on the early warning systems for risk management for disasters as cross-cutting versions and options for adaptation measures that expand the services of other adaptation measures when combined with them. At the same time, the United Nations Global Initiative of Alert for Everybody allows us to know the greatest risk in Latin America and Caribbean as reported in the 2022 and help us to carry out the regional implementation of a multi-risk early warning systems. This morning, in our chair, we have Professor Peter Litala, General Secretary of the World Meteorology Organization. Dr. Adianet Tawada Zamora, Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Environment of the Republic of Cuba. Dr. Marisa Garissa Garcia, Chair Lady of the Environment Agency under the Cuban Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology. And Fermín Balduí Quintanilla, Head of the Center for Strategic Management of Innovations and Communications of the National Institute of Water Resources of the Republic of Cuba. On behalf of the organizing committee of our Environment Agency and our ministry, we would like to welcome you all. Over 100 participants from the Climate Change Congress of our Convention have registered for participating in this session for the week, and also the representatives from Ibero-American countries who, as we said, will be also attending the meeting of the Directors Conference. Also, we have the privilege that now we have 1,362 representatives from 53 nations who have registered themselves and are participating virtually in Spanish and in English over the YouTube channel of the International Environment and Development Convention. So everything that takes place in this hall today will be also seen by many other persons of over 53 countries who are connected to our system through our YouTube channel for the convention as such. So the meeting will be very visible with its actions and statements. And from here, from Cuba, we'll be launching from our Climate Change Congress and the Environment Convention a report on the situation of climate change for Latin America and the Caribbean. So I have the honor to give the floor Professor Peter Itala, General Secretary of the World Meteorological Organization, to present the report on the climate change situation for Latin America and the Caribbean for the year of 2022.
So first of all, thanks for the invitation to come to your meeting. I just left 32 degrees temperature behind in Finland, where I spent the weekend, and then I went to Chile, Berlin, where we had the world-leading climate modelers present, and there it was only 20 degrees of temperature, and now I'm here in hot and humid Cuba since this morning. And I would like to thank the organizers of this meeting, the Vice Minister, the PR of Cuba, and the Director of Environment Institute for the organizations of this meeting. And it's a pleasure to have also plenty of WMO PRs and participants of the CMET meeting present here. I've had a long history of collaborating with Latin America, first with Argentina as a scientist. We had a joint program with Argentinian Weather Service in Marambio, Antarctica, and since then my home country Finland was having projects also in Andean region and also in the Caribbean region. And we all are very proud of the good work that is carried out here in Cuba. You have built a very strong meteorological service here, and there's also a very good reason for that. You are exposed to especially hurricanes here, and the impacts of climate change are very much felt also here. I'd like to congratulate the government for that investment, and I will have further discussions with your minister tomorrow on those topics. But at WMO, we have a culture of presenting this kind of global status of climate reports, which have been feeding in the COP meetings, and we are just preparing for the COP28, which will be hosted by Arab Emirates in Dubai, late November, early December this year, and we are promoting certain elements for that meeting, namely early warning services for all global greenhouse gas watch issues, cryosphere development, and also this high-resolution climate modeling is of interest for the government of Arab Emirates. And then we have started a new practice that where we are publishing also this regional status of climate reports, and we just published one for Europe a couple of weeks ago, and today we will publish the one for Latin America and Caribbean, where the impacts of climate change are also felt. And I would like to show you the key slides of this report now, and can I have the next slide, please? So this is a joint effort of 30 national meteorological and hydrological services, where the data is very much coming from. We have 4 UN partners, FAO, UNEP, and UNDRR, and us, WMO, and then we have more than 15 international regional organizations who have been contributing and more than 60 scientific experts who have been compiling this report. Next, please. And here we are talking about 4 basic parameters, what has been happening to temperature last year, how was the precipitation situation, what's happening to the glaciers, and what's happening to the sea level rise. Globally, I would like to say that we have seen records, less comfortable records in all of those parameters year by year, and we have been breaking also records in the greenhouse gas concentrations, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, and we are just moving from La Nina years towards El Nino year, and our estimation is that the coming 5 years will be the warmest period on record, and there's 66% probability that we would hit the low limit of Paris Agreement, the 1.5 degrees, at least on temporary basis. And it's practically sure that we will break all-time high in annual temperatures during the coming 5 years, since we are moving from La Nina to El Nino phase. Next, please. So here you can see temperature records for various parts of Latin America, first for Southern America, Central America, Mexico, and some neighboring countries, and also the Caribbean region. And in all of the regions, we can see the same story. And you can see that, for example, in Mexico, we have seen more warming than elsewhere in the region. But the records for the past 30 years have been showing growing impact of climate change. And because of this La Nina that we have had for the past 3 years especially, we haven't been breaking the all-time highs, but now we are moving to a different era with El Nino, and actually just 2 days ago we had the warmest day of globally which we have ever recorded. But you can see that there are variations in different parts of the world and of your region, but in all cases we have seen an increase, and it's more than 2.2 degrees per decade for the past 30 years. Next, please. And then in temperature anomalies, you can see here red dots, which indicate that we have seen positive anomalies, and practically most parts of the Latin American regions we have seen positive anomalies, and we have seen them a bit more in the Mexican part of the region. And largest anomalies have been more than 1 degree in Mexico, Northern Central America, the Caribbean, and Eastern Central and South America region. And then we have seen a little bit less warming in the second category of countries like Southern Central America, extreme north of South America, and Western Central South America. But in general, it has been warmer year than normally. Next, please. And in precipitation, we have seen anomalies. We have seen deficits in Paraná, La Plata basin, very severe drought, which has had also impact on water availability. We know that, for example, in Uruguay there has been major problem with water availability, and also this has had an impact on hydropower production and, of course, agriculture. We have seen also similar anomalies in central and eastern part of Mexico, parts of Caribbean, central and southern regions of Chile, and then central and southwestern Andes of Peru and Bolivia. And then we have seen more precipitation than normally in most parts of Central America, northern South America, and northeastern Brazil. And in general, what has been happening in the Amazon region, it has been, the long-term trend has been that it has become drier, and this deforestation in the region had an impact on the local climatic conditions, and there's going to be a new scientific paper published in the coming couple of weeks, which is showing that the whole Amazonian region has become carbon source instead of carbon sink. And of course, this deforestation is a matter of concern, and it has an impact on global carbon budget as well. Next, please. Glaciers, globally, we can say that the glaciers have been melting, and there has been a boost in the glacier melting, and all these red colors here on the graph are showing how much mass we have lost in the glaciers, and the biggest changes have been taking place in the tropical Andes, almost similar numbers in dry Andes and a little bit less in southern Andes. And this is of course bad news when it comes to availability of water resources for the rivers. We published status of water report late last year, and where we demonstrated that large fraction of water in many rivers worldwide, which have their origins from glaciers, is threatened. And for example, if we think of countries like Peru and how much, for example, city of Lima is getting water in the future, the melting of Andean glaciers is having big impact. And we have seen this kind of variation, which is more than the global average, but globally the trend has been very clear that we have started losing more and more of the mountain glaciers. And the bad news is that because of already high concentration of carbon dioxide, we are not able to stop that trend unless we create means to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There's a forecast from IPCC report that this melting of glaciers may continue even for coming thousands of years, and that's also contributing to sea level rise, and especially the Greenland and Antarctic glaciers. So that's that game we may have lost, and we will have less and less water coming from the mountain glaciers during the coming decades and coming centuries. Next, please. Sea level rise, globally we have doubled sea level rise during the past 20 years, and your sea level rise estimates are varying. There are differences in different parts of the region. They are varying from about 1 millimeter per year to 3.7 millimeters per year, which is happening in the southern Atlantic. And this is of course a slow development, but also this game we have lost. So the melting of the major glaciers worldwide, Greenland and Antarctic glaciers, will continue for, as I said already, for up to thousands of years. And the conservative estimate is something like 0.5 meter to 1 meter per century. But there's a risk that the Antarctic glacier melting would happen in a speedier manner, and then we would see much higher numbers, which would threaten many coastal areas and also coastal big cities. So this is also one of the issues to be followed. And this is also related to climate adaptation. Besides climate mitigation, it's important to adapt to climate change, and how to and we have to take this sea level rise also into account. And there's a risk of salinization of the coastal freshwater resources with sea level rise, and typically also these tropical storms which are felt here in Caribbean region. We can see temporary quite high sea level rise cases, and that's bad news for the freshwater resources in coastal regions. Next, please. Can I have the next? And last year we have estimated which have been the main events and what kind of losses we have seen, both human losses and economic losses. Flooding has been responsible for 2/3 of the impacts, and about 1/4 is related to storms. And we got more than 1,000 casualties last year, and they were very much related to flooding, and less than 20% was related to landslides. Economic losses, about half of them were related to storms and floods, and a little bit less than half were related to droughts. And in this economic damage, you can see that droughts were playing important role, whereas flooding was responsible for the human losses, and storms and flooding were affecting the everyday life of human beings. Next, please. Tropical cyclones, so far the recent most active year was 2017, and I have used that as an example of major losses. This afternoon I will show you some slides concerning the economic losses, and these Caribbean islands are very vulnerable economically to these kind of events. And in 2017 we have been breaking the all-time record. Dominica lost 800% of its GDP when a Category 5 hurricane was hitting them. And 2 years before, there was a loss of 250%, and those numbers are very, very striking. And this year we had, last year we had this Hurricane Fiona, which was hitting especially Puerto Rico with 2.5 billion economic losses. Hurricane Ian was hitting especially your country here in Cuba, and it has had a big impact on infrastructures, buildings, and about 20,000 hectares of land was destroyed because of the related event, and that had a big negative impact on food production. And then we had this Hurricane Julia, which was seen in Atlantic and Pacific basins, and there were several Central Americas affected, and 35 people got killed because of that event, especially because of the flooding case. And then Hurricane Lisa was hitting especially Belize, where about 40% of the population was affected, a little bit less than 200,000 people. Next, please. Heavy precipitation and flooding, that's also one of the challenges. With 1 degree warming, we are seeing 7% more humidity in the atmosphere, and once we heat the atmosphere, there's more space for humidity, which is potentially enhancing this flooding risk. And especially in Brazil, there were 230 casualties, and there was 260 millimeters of rain in 3 hours, and in February and in March more than 400 millimeters in 10 hours. And then we had also challenges in Colombia with the floods and landslides, with 266 casualties, and more than 500,000 people were affected because of that. Next, please. Drought, you can see clearly on the map where the drought has been taking place, and in Chile there has been a mega drought, and it's affecting, of course, agriculture in the country. Then in the Paraná-La Plata region, we had most severe drought since 1944, and then also in Gran Chaco area, we had most severe drought in 80 years, and also very severe drought in southern Andes of Peru. In Mexico, 30% of the country was facing a moderate to extreme drought. In Costa Rica, there were major difficulties with water supply, and in Puerto Rico, there was 2/3 of the country was facing a moderate to severe drought. Next, please. And wildfires, there were wildfires, and globally we have started seeing a growing amount of wildfires, and they have been related to drought. For example, there are still wildfires going on in Canada because of drought and high temperatures. And in the lower panel, you can see how the smoke from those fires was distributed, and they are also causing emissions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And of course, there are local air quality challenges as well. Next, please. Next, please. And all of those issues that I was already showing, they have had the impacts on agriculture and food security, and for example, this Parana River case was having a big impact on agricultural productivity, and the water level was very low because of the drought. And in Chile, there was an agricultural emergency declared last December. Gran Saco already mentioned this. There were 80% of the families were facing that problem, and it had big impact negative impact on agricultural production. And also in Brazil, altogether, the country lost 5.2% of its agricultural production during the first quarter of 2022, and it led to challenges in coffee production and also coffee prices. Next, please. And then we are talking about, besides agriculture, we are talking about energy, and this hydropower production was also suffering because of the situation. And unfortunately, these kind of events are going to be more frequent in the future, and those rivers which have their origin from the glaciers will have more often such events. Next, please. And then at WMO, we are very much promoting multi-hazard early warning services to have weather, climate, hydrological, geophysical, ocean hazard carried out in same organizations. And then we are also promoting impact-based forecasting, not to forecast the meteorological parameters like temperature, wind speed, precipitation, but also to forecast the impact on various sectors like agriculture, energy, health, transport, and so forth. And in this part of the world, we have 25% of the meteorological services have these multi-hazard services in place, and 42% have reported that they don't have such services in place. And we are very much recommending governments to invest in their meteorological services and also join forces in individual countries, especially these meteorological and hydrological operational services. And also this impact-based forecasting is very much an issue that we are promoting. Next, please. And we have means to support the countries. Our Congress just a few weeks ago approved a new concept of monitoring greenhouse gas budgets, the sources of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, and also their sinks. And now we are heading towards operational phase to better understand what's happening, and we have uncertainties related to this biospheric component of carbon dioxide, and also the sources of methane are a bit unknown. Then we have a financing mechanism to support improvement of the basic observing systems called SOF. And we just had a meeting in Copenhagen 2 weeks ago, and it seems that by the end of this year, we may have $100 million in pocket to invest in less developed countries and also island states, and especially the Caribbean island states are in this part of the world target to such investments. And these are also needed for understanding of the climatic conditions. And then we have this major early warning services for all initiative, which was given us by Secretary General Guterres 1.5 years ago, and now we are going to improve the services worldwide. Only half of our members have proper early warning services in place, and we are going to invest all together with our sister organizations, UNDRR, ITU, and Red Cross Red Croissant, $3 million during the coming 4.5 years to improve the situation, both the observing systems and early warning service capacities and impact of those warnings on at various sectors in the countries, and that's a major issue, and we will discuss that issue in New York in mid-September when Secretary General Guterres hosts his Climate Action Summit, and that will be also one of the keys, and these all will be key issues for the forthcoming COP28. Next, please. So final remarks. 22 was a warm year again, but it was a little bit less warm year than before, and this La Nina, for example, had an impact there. And we have seen about 0.2 degrees per decade warming taking place during the past 30 years. Sea level rise continued, and it's affecting also Latin American countries, especially island states. We had this flood and landslide problem, which led to both economic losses and human losses. Drought conditions, especially in central part of South America, were having big impact on various sectors, and we are improving. And there's a need to improve these multi-hazard early warning services and also climate services for agriculture and energy, and that's our common challenge, and it's a challenge for the governments. Next, please. That's all from my side, and thanks for the opportunity to address you, and I hope that you didn't find this report too depressing. Thank you.
Muchas gracias al doctor.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm Professor Dr. General Secretary of the World Meteorological Organization, who has given us a presentation on the report of the climate situation of Latin America for 2022. Now we will have a message through a video by Mr. Turi, Special Representative of the General Secretary and Head of the United Nations Office for Climate Disaster Risk Office. Please, let's run the video.
Gobierno de Cuba por ser anfitriones del lanzamiento del.
Thank you for hosting the report presentation on the climate change situation in Latin America and the Caribbean for 2022. And to the World Meteorological Organization for its drafting. Also, I would like to thank my colleagues of the United Nations system for the close collaborations to face disaster risks. This report is very important in the context of complex
en Estados Unidos,
scenarios in
la
this
cual
region,
es la segunda
which
más
is the second
propensa a
most
desastres en el mundo. En los próximos meses,
disaster
la
prone
llegada del
region
evento
in the
de El
world.
Niño será
The
un
El Nino
reto clave, ya que
event will
puede
be a
suponer
key
un
challenge
profundo
because it will
impacto
bring
en
about a
el
great
contexto
impact
económico y
in the
social
economic and
de América
social
Latina
context of
y
Latin
el
America
Caribe,
and the
donde la
Caribbean
temperatura ha aumentado
due to rising
0,6
temperatures
centígrados
to
en los
zero
últimos
point 0.6
30 años.
degrees in the
Asimismo, se
last
está
30 years.
presentando
There
anomalías en el
are also
Océano
anomalies in
Atlántico
the Atlantic
que
Ocean
pueden redundar
that
en
may
una
bring
temporada de
about
huracanes muy activa. Se hace
a very
entonces
active
que los mayores
hurricane season.
locales
So
y
local
regionales
governments and national
adopten
governments
medidas de
should adopt
planificación, prevención y
measures for
respuesta
planning and
para
prevention and
reducir los
response
desastres de
to
origen
measures to
climático.
reduce the climate
Una de las
change
iniciativas
impacts.
más
One of the
importantes
most
en este
important
sentido
initiatives in this
es
sense
la de alerta
is
temprana para todas las personas
the
y un
warning
esfuerzo
system
para
for all
desarrollar
persons
protección
to
universal
develop
de alerta
universal
temprana.
protection
Los
through
sistemas
early
de
warning
alerta
system.
temprana
Early warning systems
multiamenazas pueden reducir hasta
multi
8 veces la mortalidad en
threat
los desastres
early
y
warning system may
reducir el
reduce
30% de los
mortality
daños
rates
con apenas
and
24 horas
lower
de aviso. Estos
damages
son
only
algunos
within 40
esfuerzos
to
por
24
salvar
hours.
vidas
That's
y
an effort
reducir
to
pérdidas.
save
Como
lives and
colombianos,
reduce
junto
losses.
con OMM,
Together with
trabajamos
OMM, we
con
are
la Unión
working with the
Internacional de
International
Telecomunicaciones,
Telecommunications
la
Union,
Federación
the
Internacional de la Cruz Roja
International
y
Red
la
Cross
Línea
Federation,
Luna Roja, entre
and
otros socios,
Crescent,
para
Red
fortalecer
Crescent,
la
to
alerta y
strengthen
acción temprana en
early
esta
warning and
región
actions
y en todo
in
el
this
planeta.
region and the world at
Asimismo,
large. Also,
seguimos
we
trabajando
continue
con el
working
programa de las Naciones Unidas
under the United
para el
Nations
medio
Program for the
ambiente
Environment,
como co-líderes
or
regionales
Environment
de
Program,
la
as
Coalición Interagencial
co-leaders in the region of the
sobre
Interagency
Cambio Climático
World
y
System
Resiliencia,
on Climate
que
Change
coordina
and
los
Resilience
esfuerzos
efforts
de
to coordinate
18
efforts
agencias del
by
sistema ONU
18
para
UN
fortalecer enfoques
system agencies
articulados
to
ante los
carry out
riesgos
articulated
climáticos y
approaches
de
to
desastres.
climate and disaster
Estos
changes and
esfuerzos colaborativos se
disasters.
beneficiarán
These
mucho
collaborative
del
efforts will
llamado
benefit
a
much
acción
from
de
the
la
so-called
revisión de
action of
detalles
the
teóricos
revision
del
of
marco de
the
Sendai. Para
Sendai
concluir,
framework. To
hago
conclude,
un llamado a
I
los
make a
gobiernos
call
y a los
to
actores
governments
del desarrollo
and
en la
actors,
región a
development actors in the
servirse del
region
conocimiento
to use
climático,
the climate change
reforzado en
knowledge
este
presented
informe
in this
para
report
tomar decisiones
to
de
make
inversiones
decisions,
informadas con el
informed
riesgo.
decisions on
No
risks.
podemos permitirnos
We
un
cannot
futuro en
afford
el que
a
cada
future
amenaza
where
se
each
convierta
threat
en desastre.
will become a
Ahora
disaster.
es el momento
This is the
para
time
reducir los
to
riesgos
reduce
y para
risks
crear un mundo
and
más
create
seguro.
a safer world.
Muchísimas
Thank you
gracias.
very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much,
La gentileza de la señora
Madam
Mame
Mr. Turi, Special Representative, Secretary General, and Head of the United Nations Disaster Risk Office. Now we will have
la posibilidad de también a través de un video que nos
over
envía
video
el doctor
sent by Dr. Juan Bello, Regional Director and Representative of the United Nations Environment Program Office for Latin America and Caribbean, to have his speech.
Estimadas y estimados colegas, es un gusto
Esteemed
dirigirme a todos
colleagues,
ustedes en nombre
it
del
is a
Consejo
pleasure
Internacional
to
del Caribe
address you
Pacífico
on
y el
behalf of
Programa
the
para
Latin
la
American
Sostenibilidad para el
and
Medio Ambiente.
Caribbean UNEP.
El reporte del estado del
The
clima en América
report on
Latina
the
y el
state of
Caribe
climate in Latin
nos
America and
brinda
the
una
Caribbean
fotografía
gives us
clara
a
de una
clear
región bajo una
photography of a
creciente
region
crisis debido
under
al cambio
increasing
climático y
pressure
que tiene un
due
impacto
to
significativo
climate
sobre la
risk with
sociedad, la
significant
economía
impacts on
y el medio
society,
ambiente.
economy, and the
Esta
environment.
situación
This
no permite pasar
situation
de moda.
we must act
La
now.
triple crisis planetaria
The
compuesta por la
triple
crisis
planet
climática, la
crisis, the
pérdida de
climate crisis,
biodiversidad
the
y
loss
la
of
contaminación,
biodiversity,
se
and the
caracteriza por su
combination of both
naturaleza
is characterized by
intrínsecamente
its
integrada. Estas
intrinsically
tres crisis
integrated
están
nature.
interconectadas y se
These
actúan
three crises
simultáneamente,
are interact
generando un impacto significativo
interlinked and has a significant impact on the countries and the life of its inhabitants. Climate change affects systems and the loss of biodiversity, and it also affects the health of ecosystems. To address this triple planet crisis requires comprehensive approaches with the interconnection of the different systems and promote sustainable solutions that will address the environmental, social, and economic challenges that we face. It is clear that the main focus of our efforts to reduce the impact of climate change has to be aimed at protecting human life and its social and economic components. However, besides the loss of human lives and economic damages, extreme weather events have a strong impact on the ecosystems since their occurrence can unchain cascade effects capable of destroying the fragile balance of some ecosystems. For example, hurricanes can damage or devastate natural areas. They can also affect installation of energy production or chemical products. The This provokes the release of toxic substance in the environment. In terms of key issues in our mandate as UNEP, extreme meteorological events are highly destructive and generates a lot of solid and liquid waste, plus damages and life loss. It also prevents access by those who need medical care, urgent medical care. We, we presence of hazardous wastes can create serious effects for persons and the environment. Speaking very clearly, these transformations of environmental processes are a problem for public health, recovery, and sustainable development even after the original event. So, vulnerability in terms of extreme events makes the economy of Caribbean countries to be significantly exposed to these effects that have worsened after the COVID-19 pandemic. The high debt, the reduced fiscal space, and poor capacity to face these negative impacts, including recurrent impacts, must make us promote a change in paradigm in terms of economic growth, low carbon economic growth. The economic cost of disasters between 1950 and 2016 has overpassed the $22 billion in comparison to the $58 billion for disasters at world level. It is clear that for some countries, damages overpass or exceed the size of their economies. In this context, access to climate financing is fundamental for for policymakers in our region. Developing adaptation national plans and to reduce or disaster risk reduction program and early warning systems is important. We need to improve information services because this can reduce the vulnerability to disaster risk and create conditions for more sustainable economic development. Risk management continues to be defensive, and this has centered mainly on the development and strengthening of institutional, legal, and political frameworks or policy frameworks. Though there has been a steady progress in recent years to strengthen public policy in disaster reduction, The pace, the investment, and budget allotments continue to be unequal. A multi-sectorial approach to address these risks, including water resources, the use of land, and these adaptation strategies, among others, is fundamental for the future of our region. The United Nations Environmental Program reiterates its strong will to support Latin American and Caribbean countries in a more inclusive and strategic approach for climate risk reduction. Thank you.
Agradecemos al doctor.
We thank Dr. Juan Bello, Regional Director and representative of UNEP Office for Latin American and the Caribbean, for his message and remarks on the State of the Climate report. To conclude this first part of our session regarding the state of the climate in Latin America and the Caribbean, we give the floor to Dr. Marixa Garcia Garcia, President of the Environmental Agency of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Environment of the Republic of Cuba.
Buenos días.
Good morning, esteemed Deputy Minister Taboada Zamora, esteemed members of the chair, Your Excellency Frederick Tala, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, esteemed directors of meteorological and hydrological services of Ibero-America, and representatives of other countries, esteemed delegations and guests to this 8th Congress on Climate Change as part of the 14th International Convention on Environment and Development. For the Ministry of Science, Technology and Environment of Cuba and its environmental agency, to which our meteorological institution belongs, it is a great honor to have the presence of Professor Patrick Talas on this Congress, Secretary General of WMO, to whom we thank for accepting the invitation of our minister to visit our country during the celebration of the 14th International Convention on Environment and Development, and to participate on the 18th meeting of the Conference of Directors of Meteorological and Hydrological Services of Ibero-America. We also thank the selection of our event to present and launch the State of the Climate in Latin America and Caribbean report for 2022, in which we clearly can see the climate variability and the impacts of climate change that are already a reality in most of the countries of our region. Developing countries and SIDs like Cuba and the small islands of the Caribbean are extremely vulnerable to the increase of extreme meteorological events, the effects of hurricanes and intense drought, wildfire, the increase of sea level, and the increase of air and sea temperature, among other current and future impacts. In Cuba, based on the scientific results of different institutions and research centers regarding environmental activities, like, for example, climate variability and changes observed in recent years regarding different meteorological variabilities, the hazard, vulnerability, and risk studies of a technological and sanitary origin, and the average increase of the sea level for 2050 and 2100, a state plan was adopted to address climate change impacts known by all of us as Life Task. Life Task includes the main adaptation and mitigation actions in 15 prioritized areas at the national level and involves all the sectors of the economy and society in the development of new knowledge and in the solution of the main environmental problems for the current and future generations. An essential task within this plan to address climate change is the increase of environmental monitoring action and strengthening the early warning system with the objective of measuring accurately and to establish indicators that will allow us to determine change trends, short, middle, and long-term changes, and to propose actions based on science and innovation for a sustainable and resilient development in our countries. The Institute of Meteorology coordinates from a technological point of view all communication actions at the national level for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. 3 have already elapsed, and we are still formulating the fourth national communication. It also works on the inventory of greenhouse gas and represents Cuba in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Some recent results shows that in Cuba the average air temperature has increased in the last 30 years in around 1 centigrade, and the sea temperature is 29 and 99 respectively. We also have estimations for 67 coastal areas in our country. This enables us to develop differentiated public policies for each coastal area and to take local actions. These are some of the examples of the implementation of scientific findings with data and evidence as shown in the results of the state climate for Latin America and the Caribbean that has been presented in this Congress and that calls us to take urgent action to prevent the emission of greenhouse gases, the effects of climate variability and climate change impacts in each of our countries. It is also very important to continue disseminating these findings and results to accelerate climate actions, to design and build a more resilient world, to strengthen effectiveness and scope of early warning systems based on the initiative of the UN Secretary General called Early Warning System for All, and to implement the new and better climate services for priority sectors in each of our countries or in the region. Finally, I want to thank the professor for his excellent presentation and to the participants in this event for the messages and for the working program that has been designed within the framework of this convention, and very especially to the directors of hydrological and meteorological services of Iberoamerica. To all of you, we wish to continue working for resilient and sustainable development with science and innovation for the environment. Thank you, and we wish you all success.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
We thank the members of the panel that have accompanied us during this morning session, the members of the chair, particularly those who were kind enough to send their messages as they were not able to come, and to share with them their views on this key aspect for the development of each and every country. This not only has to do with scientific results, but also with the development and survival of our species in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean based on the vulnerabilities that each of our country faces. We thank especially Professor Frederick Talas, and we also for his presentation and his effort for coming to accompany us in today's and tomorrow's session. We know that it was a great effort on his part. I also want to say that in the framework of this International Convention on Environment and Development, yesterday we held a ministerial meeting for science, tech, and environment of the G77 plus China. Besides a wide representation of the different countries, the master lecture through a video by Professor Talas, where he shared the main results linked to recent research on climate change and its impacts on different countries, particularly developing countries, less developed countries, and SIDs, taking into account the vulnerabilities we all face. So we also want to thank Professor Talas for his message yesterday to all the ministers and high authorities. Today, as I have been informed, the number of countries that are connected to this session is increasing. We have countries participating from almost all continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, and of course Latin America and the Caribbean, many of which are present here today. We thank you all, and I ask the chair to take our seats in the first row, and to continue with the panel, I give the floor to Julian Benitez, Director of the Americas Office of the World Meteorological Organization, who will moderate the next panel. So I invite the next members of the panel. And we thank all the members of the panel.
Bueno, por favor,
We continue with the event. We still have 1 hour left. In this case, we are going to have a high-level panel on the impacts related to time, climate, and water in Latin America and the Caribbean, the early warning system and multi-hazard information system to improve anticipated action. This panel will be made up by Professor Celeste Saulo, Director of the National Meteorological Service of Argentina and General Secretary of WMO for 2024-2027. Let's put our hands together to receive the professor. Also, Mr. Pablo Cabrera, President of the Meteorological Institute of Uruguay and President of the Regional Association of WMO that includes all Latin American countries. Please, can you come and take your seat? Mr. Evan Thompson, Director of the Meteorological Services of Jamaica and President of the Fourth Regional Association of WMO for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. Please, Evans, can you take your seat here in the panel? And finally, our host, Dr. Celso Pasos, Director of ISMED and Permanent Representative of Cuba in WMO.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank all the members of the panel. This panel intends to be dynamic. We have two rounds of questions for each member of the panel, after which, if we still have time left, there will be a Q&A session for all those in the room. We are still broadcasting through YouTube, so we still have audience abroad. In principle, we have 7 minutes for each speaker, and then we will have a round of questions for each member of the panel. The first question will be for all the members of the panel. They will have to answer, and then we will ask the second question. And with this, we will conclude the panel, though we still have to see if the audience has questions. So I want to ask a question to Dr. Celso Paso. The state of the climate report says that the sea level continues to rise, mainly in the Atlantic Ocean and the coastal areas of Central America and the Caribbean. How does this affect Cuba in terms of its impact on people and the society as a whole? Thank you, Julian, for giving me the possibility to comment on this important topic. I say important not only from the point of view of the evidence on the impact of climate change in the sea level rising rates, but because in the Caribbean area, the countries are highly vulnerable to this impact. And among the expected results, the increase or the sea level rise is the one that could have worst consequences for SIDs due to its impact. In the case of Cuba, well, of course, we also face that problem. Actually, the studies carried out by different institutions and the centers of the Institute of Meteorology have evaluated the potential scenarios and what would be the sea rise levels for 2050 and 2100. Dr. Marixa Garcia said that in 2050 the sea level could increase 29 centimeters and 95 centimeters in 2100. But today there is evidence. We have data recorded on these increases, and in recent years we have carried out a more detailed study in our coastal areas, in 67 coastal areas, to identify what would be the increase for the year 2050 and for 2100, and the loss in terms of land, impact on agriculture and on other sectors. But because like most Caribbean countries, most of our industries and population settlements are linked to the sea. So it is a current phenomenon that we are seeing today and that could be increased. So we need to take adaptation measures for a problem that has been clearly identified. We thank Dr. Celso Paso, Professor Celeste Saulo. From a regional point of view, how do you see the Latin American and how do you think that the Latin American and Caribbean region can strengthen the early warning systems? What regional structures and collective actions should be implemented to help meteorological and hydrological services in implementing early warning systems? Thank you. Thank you, Julian. I take the opportunity to thank. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear the speaker? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay. Okay. I was saying that I take the opportunity to thank the organizers for the invitation to be here in this beautiful country. Regarding the questions on early warning system, I would like to start my answer with a reflection that deals with this framework of the International Convention on Environment and Development. I believe it is fundamental that within this context, discussing environment and development, we discuss also about early warning. It is a way of uniting communities, and it is an imperative to have interaction between environment, development, meteorology, and hydrology. So, regarding the question of what Latin American and Caribbean countries will do to improve our early warning system, the first reflection is that we must work in collaboration through different agencies. In this regard, it is clear that the World Meteorological Organization has been a very important tool to determine some of the criteria regarding the natural hazards affecting the different countries. It's not the same what happens in the Caribbean to what happens in the southern part of the continent. So that is why I believe it is fundamental to work on the implementation in the different communities with their different cultural, social, and historical characteristics. In this way, I think it is important to have a dialogue to establish national priorities and vacancies in each of our countries. Another fundamental thing is to understand that the governance system it's not the same how different mechanisms are coordinated in one country and in another. We all talk about this document of early warning for all persons. There are 4 international organizations leading this. One is WMO. The other one is United Nations for disaster risk reduction. The other one is the Telecommunications Organization and the Red Cross. So the first question to this audience is, do each country know the focal points of these organizations in your country? because actually we are working on an early warning system that has to include these 4 global agencies that must help us in implementing this system. So I think governance is an aspect that requires a lot of effort on our part. We cannot work isolated. And of course, there is an extra difficulty. Each country has a different governance. This has to be respected, but we have to work on this. As part of WMO, we need to commit ourselves to have this interagency collaboration so that we can start thinking on effective early warning systems for each community with their own characteristics. So thank you, Celeste. We now go to Pablo Cabreras. What are the most critical findings of the State of the Climate report regarding South America? And that would be the question, the most critical findings for South America, and which should be the key messages for the most affected sectors. Can you listen? Can you hear? Well, thank you, Julian, for your question. Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay. Can you hear me now? Well, thank you, Julian, for the question. First of all, I want to thank the hospitality of the Cuban people and the Cuban authorities for organizing this important event. Going to your question, as the Secretary General mentioned in his presentation, the most significant aspects is the increase of the sea level, which affects all island states, but also those who have coasts. That is an aspect that has to be monitored permanently. The intensity of the different weather phenomena, hurricanes are undoubtedly increasing in intensity, and we also have more severe storms. Sometimes we evaluate the economic damages, but as we have seen, this has an impact on all human activities, production, cultural activities, undoubtedly floods, landslides that we have experienced. My country, Uruguay, is we find landslides due to floods and droughts, on the other hand, that we have been experiencing for some years now. I think those would be the most important aspects for based on the State of the Climate report. And I join what Professor Saulo said, that we must have a comprehensive approach on this issue. We cannot only just evaluate the meteorological aspect, the emergency aspect on the other hand. This affects us all in a comprehensive manner. So answers for policymakers and for decision makers must be integrated so that we can address and provide a more efficient response and not just react to the event. Sometimes we only react and try to make the best, but I think planning is important because this is something that has steadily and gradually has been having an impact on our countries. Thank you, Pablo.
President of Regional Association 4. It's the same question, Evan. What are the most critical findings of the report of the State of the Climate for Central America and the Caribbean? And what should be the key message for the most affected sectors?
Okay, thank you very much, Julian. Thank you all for having me share in this session. Hablamos inglés en Jamaica, so I am your English speaker on the panel today, and I hope everyone is prepared with your earpieces to hear what I'm saying. Now, I want to also acknowledge this morning that those persons, those scientists who have done this tremendous work in pulling together the state of the climate for Latin America and the Caribbean report. It's a very important report. So those are the persons and the agencies that have had to do the dirty work in getting all this information to us and pulling the data together and presenting it to all of us so that we can really see what is happening in our region. It is important for us to realize that there are very few surprises in the report. Quite likely, many of us would have expected to hear about those changes in temperature that we have not only expected because of the climate change scenario, but we have been experiencing those temperature changes physically. We actually sense the changes in the temperature, and many of us would already be aware, but having the scientific evidence to prove what is really happening is very important to all of us. And temperature is only one aspect. We're also seeing the tremendous losses that we're experiencing from the tropical storms and hurricanes that have moved across the Caribbean and the North Atlantic area and affecting our region, Regional Association 4, that encompasses Central America, the Caribbean, and North America. So it's important that we analyze this data and recognize how it is important to us, even though we have already been experiencing it firsthand. Now, the state of the climate, we need to also see that this is not just a report on our weather and our climate. It's a state of the climate, yes, but it is also the state of our hydrological resources. It speaks so much about the droughts, and it speaks so much about the flooding events that we are experiencing and that we have experienced with time, and what we should expect to continue. So it is an eye-opener that it really is weather and climate, but it is also showing the Earth system that really encompasses the hydrological resources that are so important and really will be necessary for our sustenance in the region as we speak. As we heard about the tropical cyclones, we know about tropical cyclones, tropical storms and hurricanes that have been impacting us, and we're seeing the tremendous losses that we are experiencing because of the impact of these severe storm systems. There is clearly a need for us to pull together and coordinate our approach to these systems. And so I celebrate in Regional Association 4 that we have a hurricane committee that meets on an annual basis that looks at what is happening in our area and how we're advancing in technology, in our scientific approaches, how we are improving our delivery of service for all our members, because it's important that we pull our experiences together, see what is happening, but also pull on our experience of knowledge to benefit each other in the region. And so the coordinated approach that we take in the Hurricane Committee is important for us to move forward and advance in technology and in our use of the science. The report also highlights for us the importance of the early warning systems that we speak about. You know, we've heard from Professor Talas earlier about the Early Warning for All initiative and how important it is that we move toward ensuring that early warning systems are protecting our residents right across the regions. And so it is important that we see how this early warnings for all really impacts us and how we will really need to do some more work to ensure that it gets to the very last mile. And when I think about early warnings for all, the all really, in my perspective, from my perspective, looks at four different regions, or at least we look at it reaching all persons in our regions, but it also is looking at how we encompass all or recognize all of our hazards. There are so many hazards that impact us in this region, and this report is bringing those to the fore. We're seeing the hazards of drought, hazards of flooding, the hazards of these storms, the hazards of the sea level rise that impacts not only the larger islands, but the small islands of the Caribbean are significantly impacted by sea level rise. Of course, we see the loss of our land because of this, and Dr. Salas, Mr. Salas spoke, Celso Paso also mentioned just now the impacts on Cuba right here. But we also have to be using all of our methods and media to communicate to our people. So that's where the all is also important, that we need to ensure that we develop as many systems as possible to ensure the message is carried to everyone. And then all of our sectors must also work together. It is the government agencies, it is the private sector, it is all our people, all our non-governmental organizations, all of us coming together to make the difference. So I see this report as really an eye-opener, a reminder that so much needs to be done to move our regions forward as we take in all the considerations of the report. Thank you very much, Julian.
Thank you, Aaron. Bueno, ahora entonces.
Now we will have the second round of questions and answers, beginning with Celso Pasos again. And this has to do with the Cuban recent experience that has been also reflected in the climate change report. What has been the response by those affected or hit by extreme weather phenomena to mitigate adverse impacts and create resilience? Thank you again for giving us this opportunity. First of all, I believe, or I wanted to make reference to the fact that today the breakthroughs of science, including the sixth evaluation report of IPCC that has just been approved this year, down to findings, the regional findings are those described today as to the situation of Latin America and the Caribbean and that of other parts of the world, show there is clear evidence, irrefutable evidence, that today we are feeling the impacts of climate variability and of climate change. Those effects have been observed, measured, and proven. So there is a general knowledge, perhaps not the same knowledge in all regions, because we also know that in many places there are still knowledge gaps due to various reasons, because of gaps in observations and measurements, and also due to limited research in some parts of the world. Nevertheless, here in Cuba, we have always been thinking that most problems can be solved through science and innovation. So a first important contribution is to know which are the phenomena taking place in our countries and being able to assess the magnitude locally. After that, you can lay down adaptation and mitigation strategies and the economic and social development strategies based on adaptation and mitigation concepts concerning climate change. Usually, most of our countries, particularly small island states, are not the ones who contribute mostly to emissions and pollution levels regionally or globally, but we are also feeling the biggest impacts of climate change. So each sector must take those measures. In Cuba, first, there is a plan to deal with climate change. It is a state-controlled plan. It is known Tarea Vida or Life Task because the lives of people depends on that we take measures, and each sector has the responsibility of designing its climate change adaptation strategy through specific actions that are part and parcel of the development plans of these sectors. We could give you many examples, but I believe that very few can be relevant. Health is one of them. One of the most important impacts we have been receiving all have been an increase of diseases, conditions, and pandemics. Not all of them are directly related to climate change, but they all increase vulnerabilities and the exposure of our population additional risks, not only climate risks and climate change risks, but also the increase in the prevalence of certain diseases. In Cuba, the concept is to have a health strategy, having in mind what we call, and with this, an international concept, see health in a global way, a single health situation, not only the health of Cubans, but also the health of plants, of animals, of the ecosystems, of the environment, of the air in general, because to have true human health, we need true environment health. So that must include a series of coordinated strategies, both sectorially and individually. The same goes for agriculture or water resources. So we have the representatives of that sector here all the time. We are implementing the strategy as to the rational use of water, but also the productive use of water. How you can use water more rationally to get better or derive a better economic or higher economic profits in sugar, in rice, or any other crops. So each sector is in charge of designing its economic and social development strategies, taking adaptation measures in mind, and having in mind also sustainable economic and social development that is part and parcel of the Cuban economy and society. Thank you, it's very interesting. Dr. Saulo, the same question. What are the greatest findings of the report from your own perspective? And what can you tell us about this climate change monitoring effort? I think it is correct to go back to the report and retake what was said by the various colleagues on the impact in the Caribbean and South America and on sectors, and what Ivan said specifically, the meaning of an early warning system for everybody, not only for persons, but also for all phenomena and for all sectors. In this case, I would like to highlight, and I will invite the others to read it all, a section having to do with the observations system. In that section, there is a listing of various efforts by various agencies so that we can also have a series of climate variables that we actually use in the world and for decision making to monitor what is happening with the climate. We have the environmental variables that are indispensable and necessary, and in that case, we have the global climate observing system, which is an initiative supported by our meteorological organization and UNEP, UNDP and the International Science Council, and they think these initiatives, strengthening monitoring, must be highlighted, especially when it comes to the need to expand monitoring over the environment, the carbon contents and methane contents of the oceans and the water bodies and the biosphere. That's an initiative by the Meteorological Organization, and the greenhouse effects. All these initiatives should be seen taking into account the idea that they are indispensable to monitor climate in general. This report includes that section. The other section I would like you to read is the one having to do with impacts. Beyond the narrative on the number of impacts, the heat, number of heat waves, and tropical storms, there is a section clearly describing impacts concerning climate change in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that they're not only associated to these natural threats, but specifically to a very complex situation where there is a greater vulnerability and exposure, mainly linked to the high levels of poverty and the low levels of governance. Up to 2018, 76% of the world population lived and continued to live, possibility hasn't changed, in informal urban areas. 76% of the population of Latin America and the Caribbean, are living like that. 2/3 of the urban growth in Latin America and the Caribbean is taking place without any planning. And it is estimated about 350 million persons living in small and mid-level urban areas are mostly exposed to natural threats. So I go back to the vulnerability and exposure condition that you see in Latin America and the Caribbean as a key point to be able to make use of this report. I invite you to read it again. The other important topic in this report is that it has a regional character and that effects and impacts do not end in geographical limits. There was talk about the mega drought in Chile. That mega drought in Chile also is having an impact in Argentina. I was talking over WhatsApp with a colleague while listening to the effects of the mega drought in Chile. The drought in Argentina brought about a lot of expenses. Argentina and Brazil are generating 10% of the global food production. Argentina generated 3% of the food being consumed, and Brazil 7% of the food consumed in the world. What happens if we talk about a drought in Argentina and Brazil? That's the value of this report. That's the value of thinking in regional terms. That's the value of making good decisions at the level of the region. So, of course, we acknowledge the great work of professionals behind this report and the institutions behind this report. And we would like to invite you to reflect in those terms, in regional terms, when it comes to vulnerabilities and exposures. Thank you very much, Celeste. Thank you for your discussion, and I highlight the need for strengthening observation systems and, above all, in understanding the high levels of vulnerability in the region, and also the importance of joint work. Now we will continue with Pablo Cabrera again. Pablo, based on the findings having mentioned, and that this is a year where we hope that we expect El Nino event, a moderate from strong effect or phenomenon. What are your expectations as to the climate during the remainder of the year for Latin America and the Caribbean, and that could be the expected impact based on what you know, and especially what you think will happen in your country? Well, concerning this topic, as it was said while discussing the report, there is the El Nino issue, as stated in the World Mental Organization, is that that phenomenon will continue. In some countries, there will be impacts like Uruguay. There is a stational situation and there will be no more drought, and perhaps we will have water from El Nino. I mean, heavy rains may take place, so we'll go from one end to the next to the other. And this can also, no doubt, is important to be followed with all these parameters that were mentioned, and also to see this in an integrated manner. Importantly, there are many agencies, UN agencies, and other agencies in countries, as stated by another delegate, that are dealing with monitoring. This is essential. If we have no initial basis with technologies to have training and monitoring, we will not be working properly. And the idea is that these systems are evolving regionally. All countries should have it. I mean, all countries in the region should have the means for that. We should have this regional architecture to attain that monitoring and training. I mean, everything having to do with the monitoring of meteorological parameters. No doubt, this after this discussion we're having here, we sometimes have humans as individuals, we're trying to be sketchy to try to understand nature, and nature is in command. We make an effort to understand it, but we must have a regional and global perspective. As we say, El Nino will hit us all. So, in that, we will be able, with the monitoring, we'll be able to have a better products, but they should be known to populations and help them as they need it in all areas, in all sectors, a more holistic approach. I mean, production, the economy, society. Celeste mentioned impressive figures. And we have a vocation of service for our people. That is why it is so important, as it was said, to monitor and to inform data to people. And also, as before, it is important to give awareness to our people so that they understand what's happening and what may happen, and that they understand when we talk about early warning systems, what this is all about, what's going to happen. We must be ready. If not, it'll not only be a necessity to be reactive, but we will need to have a more integrated vision, because this phenomenon is affecting us all. No matter what you do, how you work and where you work, we must think in terms of humanity. Thank you.
La última pregunta para Eva.
Last question for Evan.
The same question is based on the above findings and considering we expect a moderate to a strong El Nino phase this year. What are your expectations regarding the climate behavior in Regional Association 3, Caribbean, Central America, North America for the rest of the year? And what could be the main impacts expected?
Thanks again, Julian. You know, I have always maintained that the El Nino has always been nature's way of reminding us about some greater issues that we have to deal with. And the El Nino, maybe it starts really with the anomalous warming of the tropical Pacific Ocean close to South America. But that simple warming ends up or results in a number of countries being impacted. And it also has so many extremes that are experienced right across the globe. For our region, there are specific extremes that we have to worry about or be concerned about in terms of the likelihood of greater drought episodes, usually, because the forecast for a strong El Nino is that the Caribbean, Caribbean and Central America, and also the northern parts of South America would experience less rainfall. And that is one of the spin-off impacts of the El Nino developing. We also are expecting that we will have those increased temperatures being experienced right through our region. And we've already started to experience those with the strengthening of the El Nino. Now, why I say this is nature's way of reminding us of something greater is that in a similar way, although the El Nino is a temporary impact, there is the global warming, not the warming of the tropical Pacific, but there is a global warming that ends up causing a climate change impact right across the globe, and that is a much more permanent situation. So we have always been grappling with the El Nino. Over the years, we know about the El Nino. It doesn't happen every year, but it does develop and it does get stronger quite often, and we see those impacts, and we have to learn to adapt to those impacts as well. So there are some changes that are inevitable. With a strong El Nino, inevitable changes we are expecting in the Caribbean region, in Central America, in Regional Association 4, and we just have to know how now will we adapt to those kinds of changes in the temporary instance, but then also considering a greater evil in climate change impacts. So one of the things with the increased droughts, with the sometimes torrential rainfall occurring in short periods, in our case, we also expect fewer tropical cyclones developing, but it does not really speak to the strengthening. We're likely to see stronger, although there may be fewer tropical cyclones or hurricanes. But all of these really do increase the levels of stress that are experienced. It's stress on our plants, our agriculture, it's stress on our animals, and it is stress for us. Stress when we deal with extremes, and I think that is what we need to get a good handle on. How do we deal with the kinds of stresses that are experienced from systems like the El Nino as we see it developing? We don't know how long it will last, but it could also have some psychological impacts on us. The stresses do create psychological, psychological impacts, and so we also have to think about how we address some of these concerns. So in the Caribbean area, we are very much concerned about all these stresses and how we will have to suffer through, again, another season of dry conditions. Water is life, and without the water, there is really a challenge to the sustenance of life. So we have to really be concerned about that in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Iván. Bueno, creo que tenemos.
I think we have some time left for a pair of questions. If the audience would like to make any question to the members of the panels, I think we have time for at least 2 questions. Somebody would like to make any question? Campuzano. Thank you, Julian, and good morning to everybody. Miguel Campuzano from Dominican Republic. The question I want to make, it's for anyone in the panel. Analyzing the impact of, or this panorama, more frequent and intense hurricanes, the sea level rise that affects countries depending on tourism. My question is on risk management. Do you believe that in general terms, with all these sudden changes that we are facing, the risk management policies or laws in our countries should be revised, reviewed, adapted so that agencies like civil protection and others may give a more effective response? That is my question. Thank you. Who wants to answer? Celeste? Thank you. Thank you for the question, Miguel. I will make a parenthesis here. When we talk about this topic, it seems everything is very negative. I'm a very optimistic person, particularly when everything depends on us. As you mentioned, the risk issue, these are matters that have to be monitored. Scientific reports are providing evidence, but the response is on our part as decision makers. We need to provide information to decision makers. There are things in our region that are working well. We are using more renewable energy, for example. These are things that education has to be improved. The education that children receive about protecting and caring for the planet. I think we are improving in this regard. But everything has to be improved in our daily life. The scientific data is undeniable. We need to improve things to make these necessary changes. But as you well said and Celeste mentioned, each country has its own policies according to their own realities. And I think there should be a permanent evaluation. This is not written in stone. We are facing a constantly changing situation. We cannot be reactive. We need to be one step ahead. And this is based on knowledge, planning, which is very important, and education. There are important issues as Secretary General of the United Nations has mentioned, like the early warning system for all in each country with their own reality. Sometimes we cannot compare ourselves, but we can learn from the lessons of others, and that is what we have to share in our region. For example, region number 3, we have Ecuador and Guyana with a direct implementation. There are other countries also in other regions, so we have to learn how they have implemented the case of countries like Argentina, Brazil, which are near to us, because when we have a border river, it's not that one side of the river is different from the other. We suffer the same consequences. So, to answer your question, Miguel, which I thank you for, I think that we must see this in a comprehensive manner. We all have different agencies. There's 4 global agencies working on early emergency, work with the structures in each country, but we also have to see this from a regional point of view to see how other countries in the same region responded or what they did. That is my view regarding your question. Thank you, Pablo. Somebody else in the panel would like to compliment what Pablo said? Yes. I think it's an excellent question, Miguel, and I think that in general and in legal term issues are go much slower in all countries. Of course, we had to understand the peculiarities of each country. I think we can advance or make progress on plans, the interagency plans, so that we can go to the legal levels with a proposal. We cannot wait for a proposal from a legal body. I think that based on our implementation and good practices, we can make proposals to the legal sector. But I do believe that nobody will think it's I mean, the codes in many of our countries were developed in the 1960s, so I think they are obsolete now. It's no surprise for anybody. I think that it's a very relevant question, the one you made. Thank you, Celeste. Any other question on the person on the back? Yes, good morning. My name is Ida Bitrani. I'm a researcher of the Institute of Meteorology, and I want to comment on an excellent idea by Professor Celeste regarding the contribution of fresh water from the Amazons to the Atlantic. It depends, of course, on the rain. Is concern for all. She mentioned some of the aspects that affect different places. I'm not an ocean. When fresh water contribution from the Amazons affects the central Atlantic and flows to the Caribbean, it also affects life in the ocean, the species living in the ocean, because it alters the salinization and temperature of the water, but it also modifies the factors that influence on the hurricane seasons, because the warm or heat accumulated in the ocean is not the same nor in the sea. If the contribution of fresh water reduces the heat, the heat content and the temperature will increase hurricane activity. There are some examples by Brazilian authors: the big drought in 1996 and the great drought in 2005. And in Cuba, we have the 1926 hurricane and the Wilma hurricane in 2005. What I'm trying to say is that I agree with Dr. Celeste. An early warning system regarding the contribution of fresh water from the Amazons should be an early warning system for all the region and involve all the meteorological services of the region, because some are affected by drought, others are affected by hurricanes, so we are all affected. So thank you. Thank you. I think with this we come to the end of the panel. Before that, I want to thank Dr. Jose Marengo from Brazil, who is not with us today, but he was with the support of many other professionals and regional agencies and working groups and other entities of the UN system, as well as other stakeholders. I also want to thank all the colleagues in the Secretariat for the hard work in the preparation of this report that will be available in the WMO website, both in English and Spanish. It will be available. There are 9 key messages that indicate the main findings of this report, this 2022 report, with a clear trend on confirming what we are living today in terms of climate change and extreme events. So, if you want to read the report in detail, it is available. I want to thank Professor Talas for his presentation, for being here with us in the Congress. I also to thank Celso, our host, for giving us the opportunity to launch this report in the framework of this Congress, disseminated through the YouTube channel of the Congress for more than 1,400 persons in around 50 countries throughout the world, mostly from Latin America and the Caribbean, but we are also people from other parts of the planet. Let's put our hands together for the members of the panel. And I think, Celso, that with this we conclude this part of the session. Just an organizational aspect. Thank you, Julian, on behalf of all the members of the panel. I would like to give you some organizational information. In the afternoon session, it will start at 2 o'clock. And then we will also have sessions in other rooms of this Climate Change Congress. We have another 2 rooms, the Embajador 1 and Embajador 2 rooms, where we will have other papers and presentations. And here in this Solidarity room, we will continue working with the CMET meeting, and we have an open session this afternoon. This means that all the participants in the Climate Change Congress can be here if they want to. They can accompany us this afternoon, or you can move to the other rooms with the other sessions. So for those who came in late, this card, there is a QR code. There you will find the program of the convention, the 8 congresses, the collateral activities, and of course the program for the Climate Change Congress that will be working here in this hotel in Embajador 1 and Embajador 2 rooms today, tomorrow, and on Friday morning. So anyone who would like to participate or listen to any specific presentation, you can check the program. In the case of CMET, I would ask Jorge if we can stay here to finalize some details on the afternoon session. We can stay here just a few minutes to finalize some details. So we thank all the participants, and we will continue in the afternoon session. Thank you.